Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webcast, Lead and Succeed in Hiring and Retention with an Effective DEI Strategy, sponsored by Circa. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and can be submitted for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and type them there. A new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please be sure to complete it as soon as the webcast is ended. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Circa for their presentation.
Hello and welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're just going to go over a couple of items of who we are, and then we will get started right into the content. So first, I'm going to introduce our wonderful speakers that we have today. First, we have Sonia Seppaban. She started as a NASA engineer and astronaut wannabe and is currently the CEO of Our Office, Inc., a category-defining leader in the emerging DEI space. Our Office pioneered the diversity and inclusion space as a service for building inclusive workplace cultures on an affordable monthly subscription and has been featured in the Mercer and Deloitte reports on DEI. Prior to Our Office, Sonia was a senior executive at Fortune 500 companies with significant global responsibilities. She has led numerous board seats and advisory roles at tech startups, investment funds, and nonprofits, and currently serves as the board of directors of Cooper Standard, a publicly traded automotive company. Sonia has been recognized as a leader and an innovator throughout her career, most recently as Technologist of the Year by the Women of Color magazine, and as one of the most influential corporate directors by Women Inc. magazine. Sonia has a passion for mentoring entrepreneurs and aspiring professionals and is a private pilot and avid explorer. So thank you, Sonia, for joining us. And we have Roselle Rogers as well. She is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Circa. She is an accomplished HR executive with 30 plus years of practical application. She joined Circa in 2006 and has been instrumental in the company's growth from local job board provider to the launch of its Ofccp compliance and diversity products. Roselle leads Circa's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy and thought leadership, as well as the company's Ofccp compliance and community partner relations. And my name is Katie Coleman. I am the product marketing manager at Circa, and I'm here just to kind of help moderate for the day. So a little bit of who we are at Circa and our thought leadership. We provide HRCI and SHRM accredited webinars like the one today. We have a Diversity and Inclusion Matters monthly publication that we put out. We also have an Ask the Experts forum with industry leaders, where you can ask your questions both as yourself or anonymously, and have industry leaders provide you with some answers. We are proud members of ILG and AAAED. We sponsor and speak at Ofccp and diversity-related conferences nationally, and we have a compliance and diversity Circa blog. So our agenda for today, first, we're going to be focusing on tools and resources to enhance your reach to underrepresented candidates. And then we're going to focus on strategy and actions for cultivating equity and inclusion in the workplace to foster belonging. And finally, we'll focus on some tools and resources for improving engagement and retention. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Roselle Rogers.
Thank you, Katie, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on how an effective DEI strategy can help you succeed in hiring and retention. I would like to kick us off by sharing with you the results of a study that was sponsored by Circa earlier this year on the state of DEI today. And this was participated in by about 374 respondents. Most of them were director level and above, to understand where DEI programs stand today. And based on the study, we found that the top 3 areas where companies struggle the most when it comes to DEI are metrics and retention. So let's start with the first one. Many companies don't know. What we found is that many companies don't know or are in the dark as to how effective their DEI programs are. They don't know because they are either 1, not measuring, or 2, they don't know where to start, what to measure and how to measure it. And a great example of that is belonging and inclusion. People struggle how to evaluate this because it's so nebulous, and what metrics to use to measure and track progress when it comes to belonging and inclusion. Then the second one is recruiting. When it comes to this, a majority of organizations said that their workforces are more diverse now and more inclusive than they were 2 years ago. However, fewer, around 58%, agreed that their workforces actually reflect the geographic labor market where they are recruiting from. For example, if the available minority talent pool in their geographic recruitment area, let's say the Milwaukee, West Allis, 4-county area, that's where their office is located. If let's say the minority representation is 23% in that geographic area, they're currently falling below that. That's what we mean by it's not reflective of the current available talent pools. So many of them are reporting that while they are more diverse now, they're still not where they need to be. So essentially, while there has been progress in diversity, it's not nearly enough. And lastly, retaining diverse talent is a major challenge among organizations when it comes to achieving diversity. We have what we call a diversity revolving door, where diverse employees end up leaving within 12 months when they find out that the workplace isn't as inclusive as they thought. And why do we have a revolving door? It's because while we have put a lot of attention to diversity recruiting, many companies haven't put as much attention to diversity retention. We haven't really done a great job at creating a formal back-end process that fights to keep the successfully recruited employees after they start. So companies need to start investing time and resources, focusing on culture and inclusion to improve retention. And this requires looking at engagement as well as your people practices, your people policies and procedures. So that's what we're here to talk about. When you're setting your goal for recruiting diverse talent, how do you know what is a good goal? Let's start with that. How do you know that that is a realistic goal? The appropriate way to set a goal is to do it driven by data. And we should be setting recruitment goals, not willy-nilly or just trying to shoot for something higher than where we were, but rather we should be setting those recruiting goals based on what is available in our geographic recruitment area. And how do you know what's available? Well, we have some resources here that are available to you, which are free. I listed a couple of them here that you could use. And one of them is datausa.io, which Katie is going to be showing for us. And if we can pull that up. So this is going to show you there's a diversity section at Data USA. There you go. And this is going to show you what percentage of, let's say, if you're just looking at general minority targets, you could take a look at that and set your goal based on that. Or if you want to be more granular and target and improve your representation of, let's say, Asian and Pacific Islanders or African Americans in your workforce demographic, then you can actually drill down and see what's available. Okay? Now, if you want to be even more specific, you can use the latest American Census data, which is now available for employers' use. So if you want to specifically look at what's the percentage of software engineers in a particular occupation, right? In a certain geographic area, then use the census data because that's going to be able to give you that. Or if you wanted to go by industry and take a look at how many, let's say, Latinos or African Americans are available within a specific industry, then I would also encourage you to use the industry data on the American Census Bureau. So know what is available and then tie your goals to aspire to match what is available. If availability is low, then expand your recruitment area to improve your numbers. And you need to deploy strategies that will enable you to hire minority candidates in greater numbers in relation to non-minority candidates without sacrificing merit and job criteria. And the key is to go and find more qualified candidates to apply. You need to balance out your pipeline so there are more qualified minority candidates that are competing against non-minority candidates in the selection process. And when you balance out your pipeline, the odds that you will have more minority candidates emerging out of that pipeline are greater. The good news for us is that with remote work, many companies are now able to recruit nationally. So in addition to tapping into local minority talent, we can now tap into diverse talent pools nationally. If where you are, let's say you are in Northwestern Wisconsin, is not very diverse, then now with remote work, you can tap into other locales or communities that are more diverse, right? And we'll talk about that more in the next slide. So let's take a look at hiring diverse talent. There are essentially 3 levers that you have when it comes to changing the demographic makeup of your workforce. One, you hire them in, you promote them in or transfer them into those positions or replace them for turnover. And Sonia is going to talk more about engagement and retention, but first let's talk about hiring. The key to hiring is more diverse talent lies in 2 places. And most people think only of the first, but it's very important to balance it out and think of the second as well, because otherwise we'll never get to where we need to be. The first is the diversification of your talent pipeline. The second is providing an inclusive, bias-free, and fair selection and hiring process. If you have these 2 elements combined, you're increasing your chances of succeeding. And you need to have these 2 elements work hand in hand. Let's talk about the first one, diversification. Your recruiters may have been having difficulty finding diverse candidates because they have been sourcing from the same communities and networks. You need to identify new talent sources beyond what they've been using in the past, or new ones that they have been ignoring, such as individuals with disabilities. Oftentimes, we hear recruiters say it's too time consuming. We have so many requisitions. We don't have time, but that doesn't have to be, right? Because here in this slide, we show you a wide variety of demographic groups represented in Circa's outreach management system, which houses over 15,500 community-based organizations and state workforce development agencies who provide employment and placement services to veterans, individuals with disabilities, minorities, women, minority students, indigenous peoples, and LGBTQ populations. By using these types of resources and tools, you can amplify your reach and make it easy for your recruiters to conduct outreach and develop candidate referral relationships with these organizations. You can also leverage state workforce agencies, such as your local veteran employment representative, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, your one-stop career centers, and your state job banks. Leveraging these organizations who provide employment and job placement services is going to be very helpful to you. You also need to tap into historically Black colleges and universities, as well as the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities and other Hispanic serving academic institutions. There's also, and this is little known, there's also an American Indian Higher Education Consortium, the Tribal Colleges, universities, and the Asian Pacific Islander Association of Colleges and Universities. So we hear a lot about HBCUs, but we don't hear a lot about the rest. So here are some additional resources for you to use. And then of course you can leverage third-party providers such as Circa who can help amplify your reach and bring diverse candidates to you. So there are many strategies that you can deploy. We just need to think holistically about recruiting, set data-driven goals, and go beyond your traditional recruitment methods to reach diverse talent pools and balance out your pipeline, as well as evaluate and focus your efforts on those that are yielding you results and bringing you qualified candidates. So we are going to, now let's take this a step further and let's talk about the other side of the equation, which is a fair and inclusive selection and hiring process. So maybe you are successful at bringing diverse talent to your door, but they are
So
not.
do we not have the poll next?
Yeah, but maybe we're not making it through the selection process. But before we do that, Katie has a poll
Okay.
question.
Sorry about that.
No worries. No worries.
So we just want to take a quick poll to see which of these resources do you currently use to recruit diverse talent. So state workforce agencies, community-based organizations, minority serving colleges and universities, and third-party service providers as well. We'll just have everyone take a minute. Okay, so it looks like that for the resources do they currently use, we have 54% say third-party service providers, 49% community-based organizations, 43% say state workforce agencies, and 26% say minority serving colleges and universities.
Perfect.
So much.
That's very good. So it looks like many of the people in the audience are leveraging the resources, although
Yep.
we could see, we could see a lot more area for improvement in terms of using the local resources that are available to you. So as I mentioned, we also need to take a look at your selection process, because maybe you're getting enough diverse applicants, but they're not getting hired. Why? Are they not qualified, or could it be because of certain biases in your selection and process, or in the criteria that is being applied? So it's important to evaluate your selection process to make sure it is inclusive and bias-free. Take a look at your selection criteria and your minimum qualifications, and understand why the criteria are what they are. Why is a degree required? Why is your minimum eligibility a 3.2 GPA? Why not a 3.0? Why 5 years experience in project management and not 3, right? So we need to be able to quantify and support those minimum criteria. And then next, let's take a look at your job descriptions. Are they unwittingly using gendered language that tend to dissuade female applicants, or veterans, or individuals with disabilities from applying? Are there physical requirements that discriminate against people with disabilities? Are there communication skill requirements that discriminate against non-native speaking applicants? So skillfully written job descriptions can go a very long way towards inclusive sourcing and inclusive hiring. So be aware of the exclusion that language and your job descriptions, the criteria, may be inadvertently communicating. Focus only on the must-haves and then leave out the superfluous requirements. Also, be aware of your own bias, whether you're a recruiter or a hiring manager. We all have them, but we can reduce the impact by being aware of them and utilizing tools such as blind screening tools. So there's a new study that was recently published showing that many large corporations discriminate in hiring based on how the names sound, whether they're female or minority sounding. And there are tools available that can help you redact that. And we'll show you some of those because they really don't have any bearing on the fitness for the role. And we'll show you that in the next slide. But before we do that, one last point. Consider diversifying your recruiting team. Train them on non-discrimination, fair hiring practices, unconscious bias, and the objective reasons for rejecting a candidate. Because if you do that, then you're increasing your chances of success. So now let's go to the next slide. Here's an example where one of the tools that Circa offers to its clients, diversity sourcing, helps debias your selection process by, as you can see here, we are removing identifying information, the names, the addresses that can color a reviewer's perspective. And we just focus more on the skills and the experience that the candidate brings. And then in the next slide, you could see our diversity sourcing tool also helps standardize the evaluation process by focusing on the match between candidate skills and job tasks and ranks them by order of degree to which they match. So you can focus on the top matches. For example, in this case, we focus on those that are 90% or greater match for the position requirements. So next, let's talk about hiring metrics. So when you're evaluating your hiring strategy, it's important to know what your starting point is and where you want to land. To measure your progress in between, beyond just tracking what are your total applicants and hires, measure how many are getting through each stage of the process. Are there certain stages where diverse applicants are falling out of the process in disproportionate numbers compared to non-minority candidates? and ask yourself why. What are the selection criteria and reasons for rejection being applied at that point? Why is the criteria what they are? Are they objective? Are they measurable? Are they job related? Are they defensible? And are they being consistently applied? Is there adverse impact? So by looking into the throughput along your funnel, you can get insight into possible bias in your selection process that need to be addressed. And even if there is no bias, find ways to open it up, to open up your hiring process to make it more inclusive. So for example, in this slide, we show analytics that track how many minority and female candidates are moving through to the interview stage and are being hired. Here we are comparing men to women, but we're also tracking minority candidates and how they're progressing. So on the next slide, we'll share with you a few more metrics that you could use to track recruitment and diverse talent. The increase in the number of diverse applicants is one, as well as the ratio of diverse applicants to total applicants. Don't just track the number. You need to track the proportion to total applicants. And then you need to do the same thing with hires as well. Total number of hires in proportion to your total hires. That's the only way you will be able to actually make the needle move, because even if you're adding, let's say 5, but if you're also hiring, 50 and 5 is only a very small percentage of your total, you're not actually going to move the needle. Then look at the increase in the number of candidate referrals that you're receiving from diversity outreach partners. These recruitment sources that you've identified, you should be seeing an increase in the number of referrals sent your way as you diversify your sources. You'll see an increase in the number of diverse candidates proceeding on one stage to another, as I mentioned. And lastly, with all the messaging that you're including in your recruitment campaign, you should also see an increase in the number of job seekers who are choosing to voluntarily self-identify their affinity and their status. So next, let's talk about strategies and actions for how you can cultivate equity and inclusion to retain those successfully hired candidates. And for that, I will hand this on to Sonia.
Well, thank you, Roselle. That was really informative. Thank you so much for that. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. As you said, hiring talent from underrepresented backgrounds and communities is the first part of the job, right? It's a very important one. It starts there. But keeping them engaged and feeling like they belong is often more challenging. This is something I experienced myself when I was trying to improve DEI across my organization. We were pretty successful ultimately using some of the tools that you mentioned and approaches at hiring diverse talent. But we soon had a leaky bucket issue, and we found that it was hard to build a truly inclusive culture that's sustainable. So why is it so hard? We're going to make this very interactive. Let's go to the poll and put up the poll, please. So if you would, please answer, which of these is a key challenge for you? Is it where to start, getting buy-in, knowing what key priorities to focus on, your budget, what to measure, showing ROI, and engaging employees, or there's something else? By the way, I think there is a typo there. So I think if you could disregard the fourth item, is where to start, getting buy-in, key priorities to focus on, and then what to measure, showing ROI, and engaging employees. Okay, I'm not seeing the results yet. Katie, do you see them?
They might be giving us just a little bit more time for people to respond, and then I think they'll share them in a second. Oh, there we go. It's popping up.
There we are. Yeah, please. Okay, well, let's see. It looks like about 27% are saying what to measure and showing ROI is a key challenge. After that, I think the highest is getting buy-in, which is correlated. Of course, if you can't measure and show ROI, it's going to be hard to get buy-in. Then we have where to start. 16% are saying that's their challenge. Engaging employees, about 15%. Key priorities to focus on, again, 6%. So overall, it looks like really the highest is what to measure, getting buy-in, and engaging employees. So let's go to the next slide and show you what we have actually found. This is, in the most widely reported information that we see is that these are the key challenges that management has issues with, right? Is how do we go beyond recruiting, right? As we just said at the very beginning, how do we get buy-in? What should be our key priorities? And can we afford it? And will we be able to show ROI? So very consistent with some of the responses that we saw from all of you. This is the management and the HR side of it, right? If we go to the next slide, please, we can look at the other side of the problem. This is from the employee perspective. This is actually, there's a lot of data on this. This is Boston Consulting Group, the BCG data, that to me, it says it all, right? They talked to thousands of employees at companies with DEI efforts, and they found that 75% of the targeted population didn't see any personal benefit despite their company's efforts. So this is really where the problem is today. A lot of people are focused on recruiting, and then once they recruit the diverse talent, people from different backgrounds and experiences, they'd like to keep them, of course. But then despite their efforts, a lot of the employees are not seeing the benefits. So why is that, right? And then how do you go and solve that? We found that a lot of it is because there is a piecemeal approach to things. So one of the things that I would like to talk about here and spend most of the rest of our time is a process approach to this. So if we go to the next slide, please. For every initiative to be successful in a work environment, you need a well-defined process. Like if you think of it, to improve safety, to improve quality, DEI is no different. We call this process the ACT process. This is what we use at our office and working with together also with Circa. The first letter A stands for align, then it's connect, C for connect, and T for transform. So we'll talk about each of these a little bit more, but just right here, I want to kind of share a little bit. The align process is really super important. Whatever you do, this goes to the buy-in and to getting everyone behind this effort. It is so super important to get this started early as one of the first steps. Because whatever you do, you want to make sure that not only you have support to get it done now, but that is sustainable over time. You want to start by assessing and planning, and we'll talk about the details of that. But it is super important to start with that and have a DEI plan coming out of that, a strategic plan. Again, we'll talk about this more, but here I just want to give you a little bit brief description of each of these before we delve deeper into each one. So I can't stress enough of all of this align. It has to start with alignment. The second one is connect. Once you align everyone, before you jump even into any initiatives, it's important to communicate that with everyone. Communicate and engage them in a conversation. What do they think about that DEI plan? Did you really take into consideration everybody's perspectives and how they would understand this and how complete they think it is? And then after you've done both the alignment and the connecting and engaging everyone, then comes the transformation. This process of transformation is actually one that is, if you've done align and connect, transform comes a lot easier than some people might think. This is really measuring, tracking, adjusting some of the metrics that Rosa was talking about, but also then extending that towards retention and engagement of the employees beyond the hiring. So this three-step process, we've been using it for about 3 years now. It's been working over and over again. It works for all size organizations. We have organizations as small as 7 employees. I think it's the smallest one in the finance sector. And then, of course, with public companies and organizations of thousands of employees, nonprofits, we find that it works in every instance and with different kinds of problems and issues that people begin with, no matter where they are in their journey. Sometimes they've gone all the way to measuring and tracking and all these things. And when we meet them and we start talking, we kind of backtrack a little bit to the align phase and say, well, wait a minute, let's first align on what the key priorities of the organization are, the strategy organization, and let's connect DEI with those priorities. And so that's kind of back to align. So this is very important to keep this ACT process in mind. If there's any questions about this that we can address later on, if we have time, I know we're planning to do that. So please, as we go through, please feel free to add your questions. We clearly, have some polls and things for you to also engage in as we go forward here, but it's really important to also answer your specific questions, and we'll do our best to try and do that at the end. So if we go to the next slide, now we're going to jump into a little bit more detail about each one of these steps in the process. So the first step is, again, as I said, very importantly, to align your leadership. So what does that mean? What is really involved? Here you can see the 4 elements of an alignment process or alignment step. So first and foremost, like everything else, you would never take on any big business initiative without assigning some responsibilities, ahead of time, right? So you want to be clear about who is the sponsor, who is sponsoring this effort. It is super important that not be just sponsored just by HR. I mean, clearly HR is a key player, a leader, and a champion of such efforts, but it's not enough, right? You really need the top leader. We always insist the DEI plans that we help our clients with are always signed by the CEO or the president or the owner of the organization or by the board. Sometimes it also includes the board members. So it is super important to have the right sponsorship at the right level so that it is a key priority for the whole organization. And of course, if there's buy-in needed to get them on board, that's again, it goes back to this step of alignment. The champions, who is going to be part of that, who's going to support that, typically, all the business leaders across the organization, and then early adopters, who are going to be, at the working level, who are the people that naturally have an interest in this and are going to be part of the effort. It is not, I have to stress this, it is not who is the loudest voices, right? That's not necessarily, the best way to assign some early adopters. It's really important that it be people that are open-minded, their passion and they think it's an important topic, but still be open-minded. And that's a really important characteristic of early adopters to get it started on the right foot. So assigning some key positions, some key roles in this effort is important. And it doesn't need to be formal. It doesn't need to be a whole big organizational effort to do this. It could be quite informal in small organizations. It certainly is. But it is important to know who are the faces of this effort early on. And that's really important to engage everyone later on. Then a process of assessment. You want to assess really from 2 perspectives. We find that most organizations these days have some kind of an employee engagement survey, employee experience survey, and that's super important. And it's great to have. We have an instrument in case our clients don't have one or haven't conducted one that we can provide. But if they've already done one, we always take advantage of that. We don't want to exercise the organization more than we need to. But the other aspect of it is assessing the infrastructure. Now, the infrastructure means everything from processes and policies to benefits and how we do things, right, at an infrastructure level. It is super important to assess that because, frankly, we see a lot of cases where, and this is something I personally experienced as well, where all the great recruiting efforts that Rosal talked about and everything else that we're going to talk about here, people have all of that in place, but they have certain deficiencies, frankly, in their policies, in the way they communicate things, that ultimately they're not aware of this. That's where their gap is. That's where things don't get transmitted properly, or that when they hire people and everything else is really in place, but for an expecting mother or for somebody who plans in the future to have kids or that has a family situation, when they come in and they see there's the family care or the parental leave policies are not really modern and what they need in their lives today, then that makes it not inclusive for them, not somewhere that they could stay in the long term. So it's very important to do these assessments. And then a period of listening. You got to listen to all the voices, right? So what we do is we talk to management, in some executive interviews, and also to employees and any other key stakeholders. Sometimes there is board members, there's suppliers, there's partners, there's others who intersect with the environment. And so it's very important to listen to them as well. It is important to do this step. It changes it starts to change the culture when people feel like they can be heard in a safe environment as well. And then finally, all of this input is put together. We assign the advisors. You can do it however it makes sense for your organization to get all of this data and ultimately write a DEI plan. This DEI plan, we have here, the three things that it should really address. Why? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing DEI? Yes, it's the right thing to do, but not everyone will just jump from their seats to go do this and focus on it because it's the right thing to do, right? So to get everyone engaged, it needs to be really linked with the organization's strategic priorities. What are you going to do? What are the specific gaps and opportunities that then go into this specific DEI objectives? And then how? The how is defining actions and success measures that will then help us meet those specific objectives. So let's find out where you are in your DEI plan. If we could have the next slide and the poll, please put up. Here we are asking, what are you in your DEI plan? It's okay if your DEI plan doesn't have all of these elements that we just talked about. People format them in different ways. But if you have really a document or some kind of a instrument that kind of puts in one place, what are your key objectives? You may, if you already have one, that's the first option. We already have one. We don't, but we plan to in the near future. Maybe you have already been talking about it and you plan to have one in the next few months or by next year, or that you have no plans to develop one yet. It just hasn't come up maybe. So let's see, we'll give you a moment to respond to those. Oh, wow, this is awesome. So by far, the majority seem to be over 90% here already either have one or they don't, but plan to have one in the future, with the split being kind of even. 45% say we already have one, and 47% say that we don't, but we plan to in the near future. That is awesome. I hope that by the end of this conversation, the other 8% will also get convinced that you need one and go about it. Thank you so much for participating in this. So now that we have talked about this first step and the DEI plan, if you would, let's go to the next slide. We are on the next slide. Thank you. Is tools and resources for improving engagement and retention, right? This is where we go to the next step of the process. If we go to the next slide, please. Now it's time to connect and engage the team. That's the C in the ACT process. Now, what's involved in this step? So it starts with sharing that DEI plan. We often support our customers in doing this. Every organization has its own unique characteristics, so it's important to communicate it in a way that makes sense. Some organizations will have a town hall, will have some in-person events. Some do it top down, some do it just at grassroots across the organization. Some do it by email, posters, other means. But it's important to be appropriate to reach everyone, right? And not just the majority, but everyone. That's what inclusion is about, right? And so it's important to share it and invite conversation about it, and really to explain the why in order to build excitement. And then at this point, we've talked about assigning, who's going to be the sponsor, hopefully the CEO, the president, or the top leader, the champions, who are the champions, hopefully most of the executives and other key players and stakeholders, and then early adopters, some people that are in the organization and are naturally going to be great at spreading the word and also testing, the process. And then after you've done all of these things, we show here a little view of, for example, one way to create a safe environment to communicate broadly. There's different means. People have, focus groups. They have some sharing sessions. Those are all good in person. But you have to keep in mind, not everyone feels safe to come to an in-person event, whether it's really in person physically or virtually, and feels comfortable to share. And the challenge in creating a truly inclusive culture and environment is at the fringes, is those who typically you want to really hear from the underrepresented, for those people that are in fact in the minority, both in terms of their numbers, they're not just that many of them, whether it's, whatever background that they might bring, but also that they just don't feel that maybe their needs are going to be heard and received appropriately. So they feel like it's a minority voice, and maybe they even dismiss it themselves to bring it up, and they just go along with the majority. This is the difference. They say from good to great, right? This is the difference when you hear some inputs that are, if you will, out of the norm, and you understand them and you communicate about it. That's when you have a truly inclusive organization. So having different means, different ways of creating a safe environment is very important. One of those that everybody's used to these days, and God knows a lot of the employees go on Glassdoor and other places to share their how they're feeling about their organization, right? So why not have one internally, right? This environment that we show here is called the Culture app. It's the part of our software that provides a safe environment. It does provide for anonymity. That's how it's different from whether you have Teams or Slack. Sometimes our clients say, "Oh, we have these other tools." Yes, but they are intended for work. They're not, intentional or intended, even if they might be used for it, for people to talk about, the workplace culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and their needs in that arena. And certainly those who would feel less comfortable because they are from a minority are not going to share those kind of concerns or those kind of just ideas, and really have authentic conversations in this kind of a environment. So it is important to provide another environment that is purpose-built, that is intentional about that. So that's where the safe environment comes in. And then educate as needed, right? You want to make sure that you educate and train during this process as well. So now let's go to yet another quick poll here to find out about how you engage your employees, right? So currently, what special methods do you use for employee engagement? Special meaning is really intended for having, towards employee engagement. Do you just have, meetings and events? Do you have employee engagement surveys? Do you use digital communications like email, Slack, and others? Do you leverage a safe digital space, with anonymity, like the one that I just shared here? Or do you just not have anything special or do anything special around employee engagement? Let's give you a couple of minutes to see how you come back with this. Okay, let's see how our responses might look like. Okay, so most people looks like you have employee engagement surveys, 73%. That's pretty consistent. A lot of organizations now have that. Then it looks like you have meetings and events, 62%. That actually is also consistent with the national numbers in terms of the order of these. And then using digital communications like email, Slack, and et cetera is about 58% of you. Looks like very few have a safe digital space, only about 10%. And some, of course, about 8% don't have anything special. This safe digital space, again, is it's usually we'll talk about it a little bit more in terms of its benefits, but it's really important. So that's an opportunity for enhancing some of your environment and things that you're doing. The last step is T, the transforming your organization. So in this step is when, frankly, if you've done Align and Connect well, we could talk about this a lot. So I'll just actually not spend too much time on it because a lot of time people do have some data on workforce. I think it's well understood. You need some data and you need to engage everyone to take actions towards those objectives that you just defined, and then start measuring, as actions are being taken, start measuring what matters with clearly defined key performance indicators or KPIs, and then assess that progress and kind of like just, assess what's happening, how it's tracking, and then adjust as needed and just repeat, right? Here you see a screenshot of what we show here, for example, about the hiring pipeline or the representation at different levels of the organization. It is very important, as Roselle said earlier too, to really look through the organization and see more locally. All of this is, a lot of it is local. So if you look at the overall organization, the numbers may look okay. But when you delve deep and look at the different areas of the organization, a lot of the lack of diversity and inclusion is really structural. So at different levels of the organization, different kinds of disciplines, different parts of the organization. So it is really important to be able to slice and dice and look at this data very holistically. We have 50 predefined key performance indicators on our platform that are already defined for you. So we work with our clients to select the few that they want to look at, and throughout their journey, of course, that gets adjusted. But it's very easy. It's something that you must look at, quite often, not just once a quarter, right? Because then you just can't see and be able to intervene and make the necessary adjustments. But this is how the transformation happens when you do this on an ongoing basis. But the foundation has to be that align phase and that connect phase. So now let's just go to the next slide. This is a overview of what we've just talked about. And one way to look at it, which I think helps people, is it's really this critical link between strategy and tactics, right? So you want to do the, assess and plan, connect and engage, and then transform. But that's really how, it's the critical linkages, right, between strategy and tactics. Because we find a lot of people have a good strategy sometimes, but the follow through is difficult, or they haven't really spent too much time doing the strategy. They've jumped into some tactics. So this is really shows the importance of providing that critical linkage between strategy and tactics to have a successful, sustainable program. The next slide just gives you a couple of, actually more than a couple, a few examples of where, what everything that we talked about has really helped organizations realize benefits. So anything from, examples are where that alignment process ended up helping a CHRO partner with their chief marketing officer to expand to new markets. It had D&I objectives that supported that key priority. By focusing on diversity metrics and specifically understanding where the issues were, by looking at benefits, a lot of results in terms of talent hiring and retention. The safe environment I just showed, we've had year over year increase in engagement of about 217%. That data we just got from our client data, and that is really significant in a world where engagement has stood kind of still at around 30% for over 20 years now. In terms of new hire engagement, when you have a holistic approach like this, when you have a process, when you have a safe environment, all the things that we talked about, it has a huge benefit that actually we happened upon in terms of new hire engagement, how positively they get impressed. Everybody knows in the first 6 months or so, a new hire makes up their mind kind of about where they work and decides whether they're going to stay there for long term or not. And so in terms of top talent attraction as well, with new hires becoming ambassadors for you, a brand ambassador, and talking to their network and encouraging others to come to your organization. So a lot of great benefits that we could talk about a lot more, and happy to do that offline, but these are just really great real results from case studies that we've had. The last slide that I want to leave you with, and the next one, is this is really, as we say, the future of work that we've been talking about in our circles for a decade or more is here. It truly is, right? From everything Roselle said, and hopefully what you saw here. The question is, are you ready? What are you doing? It is 2021, it's not 2019 anymore. A lot has happened with, of course, the pandemic, and then also George Floyd. So the expectations are different. And frankly, I was started with this statistic on this slide that over 80% of Americans believe organizations should take action on important issues facing society. And certainly diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big one of those issues facing society, among a couple other big ones. So I will leave you with this and hand it back to Roselle. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to share some of this with you.
Thank you, Sonia. So we've covered a lot during our webinar today, and we'll conclude with a few parting thoughts. If there is one thing that Sonia and I would want you to take away from this webinar today, it is, I think she and I will agree, that it's on the business imperative for diversity and inclusion. The time for discussing and debating the business case for diversity is over. It's now time for action. And if your company still does not have a DEI strategy, you really need to act fast. Otherwise, you will just severely lag behind. The society, the workforce, the labor market, the client base that you are serving is diversifying faster than it has ever had. Whether you are a large company or a small company, you can't really afford not to have a DEI strategy, because it's no longer a nice to have. Not having one is costing your company lost opportunity and can even be damaging the company already. The upsides, on the other hand, are enormous. And that's why pursuing a DEI strategy is mission critical. It's critical to your company's future survival in a rapidly changing and diversifying world. And as we have illustrated today, to succeed, you really need to have leadership alignment with your key business priorities, whether these are hiring, retention, or increasing employee engagement. You have to start there to ensure that DEI does not function as its own vertical. And your DEI objectives need to be articulated clearly. What are the actions that are going to be taken or can be taken to achieve them? What goals and metrics are you going to be using to measure progress? We also shared with you some strategies and resources for diversity recruiting. And the important thing to remember here is that it's not just about bringing them in to your doorstep. It's equally important to critically look at your selection and hiring process to make sure that it's fair and inclusive. And then further, don't just focus on the front end process. You need to have a good back end process to keep your employees. And the key to that is engagement and inclusion, because DEI is really a holistic process that spans the entire employee life cycle, and we need to approach it that way in order to succeed and reap the full benefits and the ROI that D&I can deliver to your organization. So that wraps up our webinar. Thank you for joining Sonia and I today. We have a little bit of a time for a few questions, but before that, Katie has another poll question for you. Katie?
So if you do want to ask some questions, please type them into the Q&A, and then we can get to those while we have a little bit of time. And then for those who are interested in learning more about Circa, as well as our partnership with our office, we have our Ofccp compliance and diversity outreach. This not only helps you to reach more underrepresented groups, but also make sure that you're compliant with concurrent ESDS state job bank postings, Vet Connect, as well as a compliance audit support team. We also have our diversity recruiting. This includes the community-based organizations that we had talked about earlier, the 15,500 plus, and we automatically send jobs to diverse talent pools. And then our new product that we have just launched with our office that we are very excited about is the DEI Strategy, Analytics, and Engagement. So this is what Sonia went over. It's an end-to-end simple to implement DEI solution. So we go over the proven 3-step process with you, and you get a professional guidance from expert advisors. And it's really just a great one-stop hub for building DEI into your workplace. So if you are interested in learning more, please select, and then we can definitely get back to you by the end of this week so that you can learn more. And now I'm going to go into the questions. And I know, Sonia, you did already answer this via chat, but I figured we might have some people who might want to answer it as well or hear the answer. Which are some of the challenges encountered in DEI initiative actualization?
Did you want me to answer again, or do you have it? Do you have the answer you're going to read?
I figured you would just answer it again if that's okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's really the elements that we talked about. The first one is really people have problems with buy-in because they can't really link the DEI objectives, why they're trying to do DEI, put focus on it, or get budget for it, with the strategic priorities of the organization. And then the second problem we see people have is maybe they've done that, maybe they got buy-in at the top, and there's some initiatives going on, but they're having a really hard time, engaging everyone. Employees are still, it's that BCG data that I showed you, 75% are saying, they're unaware of it, or they're just not engaged in that approach, and they're not seeing the benefit. And then the last one is, even if you do the first two, it's really knowing what to measure. People have a lot going on. They look at representation. A lot of times people look at representation. A lot of people look at compensation. But again, we have 50 KPIs, so certainly there's a lot more things that you can measure. I mean, you can look basically for HR professionals. I know a lot of people signed in here are HR professionals. So if you think of the just the employee journey, right, and you think of the overall experience that your whole team has, it's really thinking through that and saying, somebody onboards, it starts at the onboarding, right? It actually starts before onboarding, as Rosal was talking about. But then, how do they experience the organization once they're there, right? From the onboarding to, as they have concerns throughout their career, as they hear things. We have a lot of customers that had issues while there was George Floyd going on, and they really had issues with the organization, how the organization reacted. So everything that the employees are going through, people made decisions at that time. A lot of people made decisions whether they were going to stay with their employer or switch. So it is really important to be able to measure things. And as you look at, for example, retention itself, right? How much of your employees, is their decision. Sometimes you have opt-out. Sometimes you have voluntary versus involuntary retention. Succession planning, promotions, performance ratings, all of these things that you do and that the employees will experience throughout their journey with you are opportunities to assess. And as Rosal was saying earlier about hiring, it also applies to employee retention and the rest of their journey with you, is measuring those things compared to, as a ratio of the whole, right? Not just in absolute numbers, but, what percentage of people of color or disabled people or veterans or women or whatever dimension you want to look at it, right, are being promoted or have, higher performance ratings or on the succession plan, compared to other categories of the majority, for example. So it's super important to look at all of those as well and knowing what to measure. And it'll be different at different parts of your journey. It won't be the same. You'll kind of look at different things as you go through.
Perfect.
I hope that answered. I mean, Rosal, I'm sure you have great things to add as well. What key challenges do you see?
I think you had mentioned metrics, and then we have hiring and retention are the top biggest challenges that we are hearing from employers. And I mean, people set goals, not really fully realizing how to set goals. What's a good basis? How to make those goals data driven? And they may be adding, I keep getting this question all the time, we are adding as many minorities to our hires and to our organization, but the needle isn't moving. They're still at 10%. But that's because in proportion to the total hires, they're really not hiring enough. So it really needs to be looked at as a percentage of your total hires. That's the only way you'll be able to make the needle move. So it's one thing to say we want to increase minority representation by 10%, but then, or your minority hires by 10%. Another thing to say we want to increase our minority representation in our workforce by X amount, and for it to constitute from 10%, it will become 20%. And you'll need to, plot it out over time. You may not achieve that realistically in 1 year, just because of the limitations in availability as well.
Yeah, as we always say, it's a journey, right? So it's been a pleasure spending time with you all. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. I think we're going to turn it over to hr.com to ensure that they can close us out.
I'd like to thank our presenters as well as all of you for joining us today. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording will be available on the hr.com website within 24 hours. The webcast credit will show in your hr.com account within 2 business days, and we'll also send you an email with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.